Greetings, everyone. I'm Mar. Once again, this is my opinion. In relationships, be it after marriage, before marriage, there comes a time where you get comfortable with one another and it seems you're operating on the same wavelength. Whether that be you guys are talking, you start finishing each other's sentences, or you get so comfortable that you guys could literally sit, talk about nothing, or you go down a certain road, it feels like you have nothing to talk about because you've talked about everything. And whenever you bring up something new, it just seems so mundane that it doesn't even feel like it's worth discussing. Today's episode of Everybody Loves Raymond touches on that latter half when it comes to Ray and Deborah. This is, of course, episode 17 of season 5, Silent Partners. Before we get too far into the video, just a reminder, if you want to support the channel, both the Patreon and PayPal links are down below. If you want to continuously support the channel, go the Patreon route. You'll gain access to videos early, and you'll also be able to suggest topics for future videos. If you just want to do one-off support or a one-off request, go the PayPal route. Either way, your support is appreciated. Silent Partners. This is another Tucker Collie episode. And like a lot of his episodes, he does understand these characters, their dynamics with one another, so that even if they're only in it very briefly, it feels natural and the character reactions, especially when paired with the actors playing them, definitely feel great. Tucker definitely one of the better Raymond writers, as you can tell by me going like this. I just hope that when we get to next season, I get to a certain episode that he's not the one behind that, because if he is, I'm going to have to knock him down a peg or two and then put my boot up his you-know-what. As I mentioned at the top of the video, this episode is another one that focuses on Ray and Deborah's relationship, specifically their marital relationship. While it's not about the physical part of it, even though, like typical Ray, that comes up partially. You know, him trying to get some, and then of course a couple of the jokes. But no, this is more about the emotional relationship, the intimate relationship that is non-physical. Now, first part of the episode is them at a restaurant, fancy restaurant, on Valentine's Day. And you can tell right away they're going through the motions, talking, having small talk, talking about the bread, the butter. You know, you got to get it the right. It's got to be able to go over the bread right, not, with the Goldilocks situation. Same thing with the bread. And Ray has a good line here that comes up a couple more times. This bread is the best, has the right texture/density. And then, of course, Ray brings up a story apparently he shared with Deborah hundreds of times throughout the relationship, which, as someone with ADHD, I can definitely relate with that, always bringing up certain stories. Another little chick thing about maybe Ray has it and they just didn't intend it. Of course, it's a story that's never been mentioned before about Robert swallowing a bee, which makes me wonder, how the hell do you swallow a bee? But stuff like that can happen weirdly. I mean, I've gotten a bee in my hair before. And I've had one just randomly sting my hand. Bees sometimes can do like that. At least they're not like wasps or hornets, which are just assholes. Now, once they get home and they're by themselves, Ray tries to put the moves on, but Deborah's like, what, just because it's Valentine's Day, you expect me to have sex with you? We barely had a word to talk about. And they get into a mild argument that's more of a discussion, where they mention that they really have nothing serious to talk about with one another. And Deborah comes up with a solution. Maybe they should take a little bit more interest in each other's lives, more specifically their interests. Deborah will take a little bit more interest in Ray when it comes to sports, because it is a big part of his life, which she has known for the 11 years they've been married, and they've been together probably more like 15, 16 at this point, so I'm surprised it took her this long, but you never know, sometimes it does. And she's going to start by watching the game with Ray. Of course, she's going to watch another game with him later in the episode. And she wants Ray to give her his thoughts on a book she just read called Devilwood, which of course means he has to read it, which Ray does not seem happy with. This is a trait we see pop up with Ray every now and then, is that he likes writing about sports and reading about sports, but he just doesn't like reading anything else. Which, Marie doesn't bring this up herself here, but this is one thing I have to side with Marie on a little bit here, is that, Ray, you should probably read more than just sports stuff. I mean, her disappointment about him writing nothing but sports That's one of those things I will side with Ray on. It's like he's a sports writer. Any type of books or stuff he writes is going to be about sports. Whether it's about games, a player dying. To bring up something from my wrestling fandom, it's like Uncle Dave Meltzer, as we call him. He writes only about wrestling. That's all he writes about. He's not going to swerve us, bro, and start writing a novel. Unless it's a novel about the character who's a wrestler, but then that'd be a little different. Of course, some people would say he writes novels with some of his stuff, but that's neither here nor there. I'm not going down that little sidebar highway. But with Marie, she always just seems to think that Ray should write something more than just sports, but hey, he's a sports writer. But him reading more than just sports, definitely. Because to be a good writer, you have to read a lot. Because it also will help improve your writing, because you'll get a little hint about grammar structure, how to construct paragraphs and all that. Even if it's going to be a little different in fiction compared to an essay or an article, it will help. Might even figure out a way to improve some of your humor, because as we've seen from Ray when he's writing his articles, he does like to interject humor in there. And we'll see that in the future too. Of course, we'll see it's not everyone's cup of tea, which is one of the running gags. I mean, I think Marie says at one point, I think you're the only one that thinks you're funny, which I don't think that episode's come up yet. Now, getting back on track, he decides he will, which the way she talks him into doing that is like, I will give you the full physical tour, like chapter 1, which that scene is shown on the DVD during the main menu crawl, as is the opening line of the novel, because for the life of him, Ray cannot get through this novel. He gets stuck on the first page, which he tells Robert when Robert shows up the next day. And the opening line is, imagine a rain so beautiful it must never have existed. And he's like, what does that mean? Now, Ray seems to be someone that is like Drax, doesn't get metaphors, doesn't care for them. And I kind of get it, because there are times where I think you should definitely be open with what you're saying, but that's more in person. Or if you're sending someone a text or an email or a letter, unless you're writing a poem to them. But in literature, you can afford to be a little bit more metaphoric with your language. Be a little bit more, artsy with it. Especially with your opening line. Because you do want to catch the reader's imagination and get them hooked, and sometimes set the stage for the whole book, and if it's the opening in a series, the whole series. Probably one of my favorite examples of that is Stephen King's opening line for The Dark Tower. The man in black fled across the desert, and the gunslinger followed. That's a great opening line. This one's a little artsy, but we never hear what the rest of the book is about. It's called Devilwood, so it's probably about a town or something else. So Ray, thinking it should be about something devilly, is like, you really don't get naming conventions. It seems like he's merely just a cinema guy, not a book guy. But based on how we've seen Ray act before, it makes sense that he would get lost by this book. And of course, what does he decide to do? To try to get out of watching the game alone with Deborah, he invites Robert and his dad over. And Frank coming is what blows the plan apart. Because one of them showing up, okay, Ray could probably get away with that, especially since his argument is he's still sad about not having a girlfriend. But both of them coming over, that's when Deborah starts to get a little suspicious, especially with Frank being, well, Frank. Mentioned at the top of the episode, Tucker Collie plus Peter Boyle. Deborah does not take kindly to Frank's little comments, some of which are misogynistic, but they are stuff that you would imagine Frank saying. It's not super, super misogynistic to where he's like, get back in the kitchen, but it's like a couple pegs below. He says stuff like, what, is she waiting for something to come out of the oven? What did he do? What did he do that you do this to him? Implying that women cannot like sports, or that it only should be them in there watching it. You can interpret it how you like it. It just shows that Frank does have a narrow field view. Just because you and Marie don't have a lot of common interests that line up doesn't mean there are other couples that don't. Like, one of my preferences is I like to have at least a few interests in common with someone I date. I mean, if we don't all have 100% aligned interests, that's fine. We can, that's where compromise and learning to see what other people like comes into play. Like with this one, what are your thoughts on this? I don't know, I've never seen it. Give me your thoughts on this? Okay, you give me your thoughts on this. And then common interests. It's just Frank being Frank. But of course, he's the one that blows the whistle on the plan, and Deborah gets rightfully annoyed at Ray because it's just another item in the long list of times she's asked Ray to do something for their relationship, and he can't even take it seriously. And he gets called out when she asks him how the book is, because before she asked, he said he was good. He's like, "What's it about?" And he tries to weasel his way out of it by mentioning the first line, which I just love. This is so Deborah that she remembers the first line of the book. I just love that. Once Ray tries to say it's about a rain so beautiful, I can't believe it existed, and she calls him out on it. You gotta applaud Deborah at that point, because she's had enough of that when it comes to Ray trying to weasel his way out of doing, as Robert so elegantly calls it when he shows up, homework. Now, they try to have a discussion across the street, but it turns into a non-discussion when they see that Frank and Marie seem to be able to interact with one another without having to say a word. And of course, they realize, maybe times like that are fine. Nice little lesson they learned from Frank and Marie, but it's inadvertent because it seems like it was a standoff because Marie comes out of the room and she can't. There are 2 deleted scenes for this episode, which when you watch the final cut, you can kind of see that because of how certain transition shots are edited. But it also kind of seems like it would pick up at the appropriate moment. And they're early on, so it only affects the way they had to edit the opening part. First one is an opening scene where Ray and Deborah leave the kids with Frank and Marie. Ray complains about having to wear a tie to eat where they're going. Which when I heard that, I'm like, oh, poor baby. Did you have to wear a tie? Did you have to dress up an adult to spend Valentine's Day with your wife? Which, I do get it. It can be a bit annoying. But sometimes it's nice to dress up. Like when I went to Texas de Brazil, it's semi-dress up. You have to at least wear business casual in there. So I can imagine a step up, having to wear a tie and all that. That's fine. And of course, Frank mocks it when you go there and they give you one of their ties and he just uses it as a bib, which is total Frank. But it's like, that's why you look up the info about the restaurant before you go. That's one thing that's kind of a pet peeve. Is like, if you're going to go out to a place and you don't know like what the dress code is, you don't know what you're allowed to bring in and not bring in, or if there's an age requirement like at a casino, look up the info. It always is a pet peeve. Oh, I thought it was 18. Oh, I didn't know I couldn't bring in these. Can you hold on to them? Nah, it's just a little pet peeve of mine. A little sidebar there. And Frank, of course, mocking it. It's in his character, but it's still one of those little eye roll things. And of course, Frank and Marie mention they have no Valentine's Day spark, and they laugh it off. Of course, that's when they're asked a question about this killing their Valentine's Day. It kind of seems total in character for Frank and Marie. They don't seem to be the type of person to go out and celebrate on Valentine's Day. They're more like just the general anniversary. Not every single thing. Now, the next deleted scene is after the dinner, which, as a little aside, that little transition, the episode kind of, I think, starts a little bit stronger, just showing them already at the restaurant. We don't need to see them being left with Frank and Marie, even though we lose out on those few moments. Because we already know who's going to be probably watching the kids. Now, Ray and Deborah return home, and Frank and Marie are asleep on the couch watching TV. And there's one line that Ray says that I wrote down that it's a little chuckle-worthy. This is what it would be like if we had them stuffed. Which, just hearing that immediately makes me think of John Cleese and the line he told his mother one time when she said her usual, "Oh, you'll miss me when I'm gone, John." And as he said in the comedy thing, who knows, maybe one day she'll be proven right. Well, one time he was having enough of her attitude. He's like, "No, I won't." And she's like, "Why not?" And he's like, he had to think on his feet quickly. He's like, "Because, mother, when you die, I'm going to have you stuffed." And she laughed at it. Of course, they wake up when Ray turns off the TV and they go home. And Frank mentions something about finding the surgery channel on their list. And he's like, "Yeah, I don't like it as much." Now, the fun thing about that is a later episode when Marie makes the Christmas cards, which I believe is next season. It might be season 7. It's one of the next 2 Christmas episodes. He mentions liking it. So maybe he found it again and he actually likes some of the stuff on there. Just one thing to mention. That's really about it to talk about this episode. It's another fun episode. I don't know if it will end up making my list, but like a lot of the other episodes that I've revisited on here, and you probably heard what I'm about to say, those of you who've been watching this series, it's one that I identify with more as an adult. It's funny how that happens, especially going through more relationships since the last time I watched it, being a bit older, almost in my mid-30s, so it's definitely one that hits close to home. Who knows, maybe another decade when I go through these episodes again, maybe it'll hit me even more, especially the Robert parts, depending on how parts of my life go between now and then. Yeah, that's about it. That's all the ones I have for my notes, and based on what I saw yesterday when I looked, the next episode is going to be the first episode on disc 4. Till next time, guys.